All right, so I'm Mike Taylor. Jen already introduced me. I live in Austin, Texas, and I've worked at Mozilla for a couple of years. Before that, I was at Opera, which is another browser. But yeah, so these days I work on Firefox, and I work on the platform team, which we build Gecko, and we got a special discount for Dinosaur.js. You can get free downloads of Firefox for the next 2 hours. So take advantage of that. So anyways, the topic of this is web compatibility, and it's kind of like a weird niche career I've stumbled upon. And I want you guys to understand what it is and why it's important, not just for browser vendors, but for developers, right? And for primarily for users. And to do that, I'm working on this metaphor, right? Like, it maybe doesn't make sense, but you're going to bear with me, and we're going to try to figure this out. And so for this metaphor, I need a drink. And I went to look for the state drink of Colorado, and it doesn't exist. It's kind of a bummer. Oddly enough, Arkansas, the state drink is gravy. That's a fine choice. So what we're going to do is we're going to steal Florida's, which is orange juice, which a lot of people like orange juice. Okay, so imagine the web is orange juice, right? And we all really love orange juice. Raise your hand if you hate orange juice. For the record, nobody raised their hand. Nope, not even that guy. I think he's having an allergic reaction back there. Okay, so the orange juice is the web, and it's so important, and we want everyone to have access to it, right? Everyone should have access to this juice. Like even this little kid, he deserves the web or the orange juice. He might actually want gravy, I don't know. So this is like this fundamental human right is to have access to. I already hate this metaphor. Sometimes though, that's not really, we all expect to pour the orange juice and get it and drink the orange juice. Sometimes people receive different experiences. So for all my Hispanohablantes in the crowd, claro, you'll notice, I'll translate for you, right? Look at the number 19 and the number 20. I have no idea why this is different. This is potentially really subtle racism, I don't know. Again, we're in Florida, orange juice, I don't know. So people trying to receive information that is vital and important to them are getting slightly different experiences. Sometimes it's broken, sometimes it's not. Here's an example of like one of the most popular websites in Japan. And if you look on the right, this is how this would look in like an iPhone. And maybe last year, if you looked on the left, this is how this would look in Firefox on Android. And so that's a little disappointing, right? Here's another example. My favorite website, OkCupid. I probably shouldn't have said that out loud, but so here's another example, right? Like that looks cool on an iPhone. That looks really weird in Firefox, and we'll figure out like what's going on and why these things are so broken, and hopefully I can tell you what browsers are doing to make this better for all of us. And then here's another example, etc. So web compatibility is really like being the plumber of the web. Like when things break, when there's backup, etc. Like we go in and we try to understand. And this is not just a Mozilla thing, right? Like all the browser people try to understand that the code they're introducing, new APIs or removing, etc. We're not breaking the web for our users. So we're going to look at a couple instances of when things went wrong. And I don't remember why there's tamales on here, but that's okay. So we're just going to take a step back. So raise your hand if you know what a JS prototype is. Okay. Okay, now you're all, like, kind of reflect. Like, do you really know what a JS prototype is? Like, I don't. I have to look this up, right? You've got, like, prototypes, then double underscore proto, and it's complicated stuff, but basically in JavaScript you have this inheritance model where you can inherit from other objects, and a prototype is this magical chain that links those objects, and so when you're looking at properties or methods and you don't find it on the object you're looking at, you go look at its parent, we could say. And then if you find it there, you're golden, you can use it. And it's pretty cool, like JavaScript is a dynamic language, so you can actually mutate and change these prototypes and do really interesting things, or introduce lots of bugs. I stole this off of a web page last night. Top Tall, they seem pretty great. Anyways, that was supposed to explain what I just said. So ES6, we call it ES 2015 these days, but it introduced something called string prototype contains. And if you look at the examples, if I duck and hide this stack of marshals, you might be able to see it. On the bottom, line 5 and 6, like that's the ES6 construct, right? You have this contains method on the string prototype, and you give it a search string, and you have this optional position argument. So this is basically like a really nice way to do index of, and to find out if there's a substring within your big string. MooTools, round of applause for MooTools. That was a sarcastic round of applause. So, just kidding, they're super cool. So they actually had their own contains method on the string prototype, but this was years ago that they invented this, really nice sugar. But the syntax is slightly different, right? What do we call that? We call that a method signature, right? So the first argument is the substring, and the second argument is this thing called like a splitter, or I think that's what they call it in their terms. But basically, if you look through the examples, you can see why on line 3, it contains C. That's true because it's looking for a C that's preceded by a space or followed by a space. But in line 4, B returns false because it's not preceded by a space or followed by a space. I don't actually know. Anyways, what happens when ES6 adds its own string prototype method is things explode, right? Because MooTools didn't implement this in a way anticipating that built-in objects would be extended in the future. And so web pages break, and that's not really great. So what do we do in the standards world? Like, we do the most elegant thing, which is just rename it, right? So now we just call the string prototype includes, and as far as we know, this is web compatible. Yeah. So here's another similar problem. This one's a little bit more in depth. So array prototype contains. So kind of the analogy from the string prototype to the array prototype, we have this other contains method. And you can see it's really kind of nice looking, and you can just say like, okay, does this array contain this item? And if so, let's push it onto some other, or if it doesn't contain it, let's push it onto this array. So the way this is implemented in MooTools, my favorite JavaScript library, is you've got this for each method, right? And then it has this implements method, and it's going to add the name and method onto that array. And we'll look at all this code. You don't have to even pretend to understand this because it's not important, but you can see on line 4, it's calling the prototype, and it's taking that array prototype and it's tossing that contains method onto the prototype. And then how that should work eventually is it's going to loop through and try to find that method when you call it, but then this kind of stuff happens, right? This is the kind of like mysterious error messages we see in the browser console, and we're not entirely sure what that means. Like, why is this .contains not a function? Because the doc says it has a function. And obviously the reason is because in ES6 we added array prototype contains, which is non-enumerable by default. So if you're going to loop in a for each over the prototype of the array prototype, it's not going to appear, and then your code explodes, and you hate web browsers. So, right, like we're into this, we just rename things, problem solved. The alternative to renaming things, and we've done this in the past, is you contact every single website using that method, and you ask them to change their code. Right? Like, that's been my job in the past. It's not very fun. It turns out nobody cares. Also, nobody actually even remembers how to like FTP into the whatever server. Okay, so this one is kind of crazy. We'll leave prototypes alone in just a minute, but this one's really interesting. So when we introduced array prototype values in SpiderMonkey, which is the name of our JavaScript engine, this broke MooTools, surprise, surprise. And I think this bug in particular broke JS Fiddle, which is built using MooTools. And so like you absolutely cannot break JS Fiddle. You're going to have a bad time. And this took a little while to figure out, but there's really smart people who work with me. And so if you look here in this string that eventually gets concatenated and evaluated, you've got this with values. So let's remember so the trick here is to understand how variables are looked up, and typically how that happens is, or I guess properties or variables, it's all the same thing, right? You look in your innermost scope, and then you kind of go out to the next level of scope, and then you go out to the next level of scope, and you finally hit the global scope. And if you don't find that, you'll get like a type error, right? When something is in a with block, it's a little bit different. So it'll look within that innermost scope, but depending on what kind of object it is, it will traverse the prototype chain. So suddenly, here, if this values is an array, it looks for this values.values property, and it's like, well, that doesn't exist. So let's go up the prototype chain, and ES6 added a values method, and suddenly we have that, and it breaks, and yada, yada, yada. So the way we solved this was in the ES 2015 spec, there's this thing called unscopables. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of that. Nobody, right? Brian Sinclair, sorry. He's heard of that. So this is like a magical hack in JavaScript engines that says like, if we add this to a function or a prototype method, don't appear in with blocks when you're doing scope lookup. Like that makes no sense, right? It's just crazy, but it makes the web work. Okay, so like you're starting to feel a little traumatized, and I apologize. But let's look at the DOM, because the DOM's really fun. And I happen to love the DOM. So this was a weird bug that was reported to us. So someone was trying to look up this restaurant in in New York, a Japanese restaurant in New York, using this site called Schmap. Okay, so you open this website. Have you ever had this experience and it's like, hey, rotate your phone? And you're like, of course, that makes sense. Please turn your phone vertically. And then you turn your phone and it says, please turn your phone vertically. That's a little weird. So let's look at the code. You guys can see on line 4, eventually what this boils down to is there's this window orientation property. Does anybody know what spec that came from? No, you don't. I mean, that's like a terrible question to ask, right? This is like a job interview right now. HR will be in touch, right? So window orientation was this Apple proprietary thing that they invented with the iPhone 4, and it's really useful. You can tell which way your phone is, but Apple sometimes forgets to write web standards. Haha. Okay, so window.orientation is not equals 0. So when there's something, you're trying to access a property that doesn't exist, it's undefined, right? So I think, Steve, you should have some 3D glasses under your seats. Is that true, Steve? No, sorry. Oh, sorry. That's not true. We'll do this in 2D. Anyway, so you're going to access the JavaScript interpreters in your mind and just yell out, is this true or false? Is undefined not equal to 0? Yell it out. True. Everyone's so nervous, right? Like I don't freaking know. Open your consoles and type it turns out this is true, right? So we're going to call this bad orientation function. We'll look at this code again. So if true, call bad orientation, and then your life sucks. So that's sad. So anyways, the point here is Apple released this thing called window orientation that was really cool. Websites depended on it. There was no actual spec, so we had to reverse engineer this. Microsoft did the same, and I wrote the spec for this, which probably will never load. So now we have like a specified DOM property, and it's interoperable, and it works everywhere. So if you were to visit that site today, it would just work. So that was the DOM. So now we're gonna look at the CSS object model, which is my second favorite thing. We're gonna do some quizzes, okay? So which of these work in Firefox, Edge, and Chrome? Take a second to look at this. Like you're feeling like this is a trick question, right? And it sort of is, but does anyone want to guess? 2? I can't actually hear anything you're saying, so I'll just tell you the answer. So this should be maybe a little shocking, that element style WebKit transform and obviously unprefix should work, but Edge, Gecko, and Chrome and Blink, they can all speak this now, which is a little disturbing, perhaps. Okay, so that's fine. Like sometimes browsers do weird things, but which one of them is correct, right? Like what does the spec say you're supposed to do? And that's also a trick question, right? So the spec actually says, because so many websites were developed only thinking of iPhone, et cetera, only using WebKit prefixes, like if you want to render the web, you have to support these WebKit prefixes. This was like super controversial stuff 4 years ago. Microsoft was about to implement like WebKit device pixel ratio, and people freaked out. So they backed off, and then Opera did it. The sky fell. Internet stopped working. Raise your hand if you actually care about this today. There's like 2 people. They're a little incensed. Yeah, they're pissed off. That's okay. I don't actually care anymore. Like I care that web browsers work, right? Like I want that juice. My bad metaphor. So in the spec it talks about, so when you're doing setters and getters on the CSS style declaration object, or class, whatever we want to call this, like you've got the normal camel cased attribute, and this is the capital case WebKit transform, and that would also be Moz transform. Everyone did this so wrong. They weren't actually following the spec that we needed to introduce this thing called a WebKit cased attribute. And if you go read that in the spec, it says like, you know, lowercase the W, because why not? So we're gonna look at some CSS. I apologize in advance, like that's not what you paid for. But sorry. So does anyone want to guess what this would be? I'm sure a lot of you are like actually good CSS developers. If you were looking at this on the left, you got up this bug report, like what would you guess is wrong? Just yell it out. Background size, background position, something. I didn't hear those. But those first 2 are correct, right? So there's like background position X, background position Y. Those are actually standard now, which is cool. They didn't used to be. But the real problem is this site was only developed with WebKit prefixes, right? It's like, oops. And then as soon as you add support for those prefixes into Gecko, that's actually what that is on the right, and it works. And you can meet nice people on the internet. Right? Same thing here. What would you guess is the problem here? So there is a background image problem. Like you can see this gradient. There's a little background image there. We're gonna sit here all morning long. Flexbox, right? How many? There's like 17 versions of Flexbox. This one used like version 7, only using WebKit prefixes. There's some box shadow, WebKit gradients, et cetera. Like all this garbage that is part of the web now. And this is really interesting. We discovered this. So when we added support for WebKit gradients and WebKit kind of CSS prefixes, we discovered there was this other property that we didn't even know about. So we're like, sweet, we're done. And then we load up stripe.com, and it's like, oh crap, that's not normal looking. Here's what that looks like in Chrome. And the CSS here is, they're using this really cool property called WebKit background clip text, which allows you to basically, it like creates a clip path around the text. And so you can have like really sweet gradient text, right? Like, does everybody feel really good looking at that text? I agree. Like, I want to click show me. So that's like really important stuff for the web to have. And so Apple forgot to write a spec for this one. Oops, right? So I did. You're welcome, Apple. So we have this now, and like this is implemented in Edge and Gecko. So like you can actually ship this stuff in production websites, and Mike Taylor would, like, I don't judge you. Like, this is part of the web now. It just has a really crappy name. So, and so this is what this looks like in Firefox today. Hold your applause, thank you. So for the 4 people who are a little frustrated that maybe other browser engines are implementing WebKit prefixes, like that might feel dirty and wrong, like I get it. So our solution to this problem is like, we're gonna have to, let me take a step back. Like browsers have been doing this from day one, right? Like, has anyone ever written document.all in a DHTML website? Like Brian Sinclair and Potch and like these graybeards of the web. Like this was just like stuff that was super important but only worked in IE or Netscape. I think that was an IE-ism. Other browsers had to reverse engineer that because they wanted the really cool Space Jam website to work or whatever it was. So like browsers, you know, it's like there's all these non-standardisms and it works in your browser but it doesn't work in the competitors, so you have to reverse engineer, and it's a huge waste of time, and we could have been building like awesome features. Instead we're doing this crap. And so to kind of solve this problem, it's like, let's write a standard and let's just document all this garbage, so if someone wants to build a new web browser, they don't have to do all that work. They can actually just go to the spec, and it's not a lot of stuff, right? It's just a couple pages of garbage, and it's an ongoing thing. Like there's still a lot of work to do, but that's kind of the story of the stuff you have to do to make the web work. Sometimes you add new features and you break sites, and you gotta solve that problem. Or sometimes developers are just using some cool feature that a browser implemented and is non-standard, and you have to figure that out. So there's also like sometimes we're in the business of removing things from the web. This one actually makes me a little nervous because like I want websites to work for everyone. Show modal dialog. I'm sure Brian Sinclair is the only person who's ever used this in a website. This is like a wicked old API. What it did was it's like window.open, but it pauses JavaScript execution in the background until you click like OK or cancel. And that's really complicated to do at a browser engine level, and so like Chrome said, screw it, they tore it out. Edge, when they forked from IE, they tore it out. In Gecko, in our multi-process mode called electrolysis, we didn't fix it. So this is something that's really like disappearing from the web. So far, all we know is if you use Outlook Web App 2010 and you know who you are, like image attachments don't work. So that sucks. Talk to your friendly DevOps person and ask them to upgrade. App cache, this is pretty controversial stuff, right? Like app cache is pretty terrible, but it works. And browser vendors, and maybe myself included, like don't want this to exist on the web. Maybe we're not there today, but maybe in 2 years or in 1 year we'd be at a point where we can say like, hey, we have this really cool service worker polyfill or tool to migrate your stuff. App cache is going to stop working, and so that's something to kind of keep in mind. If you're like in the startup phase right now and you're like pitching to Y Combinator, like don't include app cache in your like that shouldn't be your core technology. Check out service worker. And then there's this wacky old HTML element isIndex, which was removed just recently, which you can Google that and figure out what it does. It's really strange. And it actually sounds more interesting than it actually is. So anyways, okay, so this is kind of the feel-good portion. Like you're really distraught at all these broken websites. So what can you do? So you should read web standards. I think this is a really important part of, like what you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to implement a feature, if you're trying to use service workers, go read the standard, go read the spec. A lot of it won't be for you. It's like implementer algorithms, but there's a lot of important concepts. That's super important. And like optionally, you can use web standards. But it's good. Are you guys familiar with w3schools.com? Yeah. That's not the one. But if you look at the second result, click on that and read it. So you should be testing. Like this is kind of silly. I have to give a talk, be like, hey, you should test your websites in other browsers, but you should, because a lot of people don't. I forget what this is. Use pre-release channels. So I'm using Firefox Developer Edition. There's actually a ton now, right? You've got Dev Edition, Edge Insider Preview, Safari Tech Preview, Chrome Canary. There's a thing called Opera Developer as well. So you can see like the APIs that are being added that are coming down the pipeline in 6 weeks, 6 months, et cetera. And you'll be like, holy crap, our app exploded. I need to tell Google about this. I need to tell Mozilla that like you're breaking my website. And it's not my fault, and so you should report bugs. Raise of hands, who's ever reported a bug to a browser vendor? Okay, that's actually really impressive. That was, I think, like 10 people. This is scary stuff, right? Like you don't know, like you're like, oh, I don't want to bother these engineers, and I don't know how to report bugs, and like Bugzilla looks like a garbage fire, and so, like, I get it, but report bugs, and don't be afraid of reporting dupes. Like, so I built this website with a team of people. It's an open source project called webcompat.com, which we tried to make it really easy to report a bug for a website, and we try to understand like why things are breaking, and that's not really the point of my talk, but if that's interesting to you and you want to like write code or help diagnose broken websites, you can check that out. But you can also like honestly like send me an email, write that down, be like, holy crap, this doesn't work in Firefox. Like, Mike Taylor, why doesn't this work in Firefox? I actually get paid money to look at your broken code, so don't feel bad. That's it, so thank you.
I'm wrong. Are two things. One, the WebKit prefix is what killed off the dinosaurs.
Yeah, that was unfortunate.
Also, I feel the other takeaway is that we should just stop letting people access the internet on their phones. Like,
there's a famous quote from like was it State of the Browser? There was some kind of browser wars thing at South by Southwest. Like some lead of some open source browser company said in 2004, like, no one's ever going to look at Wikipedia on their phone, and I think he was right. So.
There's this funny video of David Lynch, the filmmaker, when like the iPhone came out. Someone made a fake iPhone commercial out of it using like the initial jingle they used to play of him just like cursing off people who use their phones to watch movies. He's like, no one needs to watch a movie on an effing phone. And I feel that way about the web sometimes.
Yeah, it's painful.
Yeah. When I first met Mike, I was speaking at a conference and I was working at the NBA at the time, and then he was there and he emailed me and he's like, you work at the NBA. There's this bug in Firefox where, well, it wasn't a Firefox bug, it was a Firefox OS bug. I think the stats site, we were sending you to the wrong site. Mm-hmm. And so he emailed me and was like, I just saw you talk, and like, can you fix this bug? And that's like...
Yeah, I should apologize for that.
No, I was like, he has the coolest job ever. So that's pretty rad. So yeah, he's super like open to receiving your bugs because again, he's getting paid for it. If, let's say you have a bug that you've been trying to fix and you've been trying to find a contact or from some company, and they happen to be in this audience, who's like on your list? Who are you looking for?
I'm looking for what's that travel site? You're not. It's TripAdvisor.
TripAdvisor.
You're not properly encoding your hash keywords in SVG background images.
Is anyone from TripAdvisor here? They're not going to raise their hand, but. keep an eye out for this guy.
Yeah,
Meet up
you
with
should-
him after.
You should encode your SVG background images.
Yeah. So there you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen.